The next one is mindful buying. This is an interesting one because we're not very mindful of what we buy in terms of carbon footprint. We're usually very mindful of what we buy in terms of aesthetics, style. We have to think back 200 years ago. 200 years ago, the average man had two hats. He had a hat that he'd wear to work, and he had a fancy go to church on Sunday and Easter hat. But that was all he needed. Now, how many people today here have only two hats? How many people only have two pairs of shoes? How many women only have two dresses? Well, what happened was the Industrial Revolution. Things became cheaper and people got richer. It used to be in olden days, only the rich people, royalty, kings, could afford anything they wanted. But now, with the rise of the Industrial Revolution and consumerism, the consumer is king. Now everybody can afford things they want, much more than what they need. This became the new ethos, or the new mythos, in our culture. The chief business of the American people is business. This is Calvin Coolidge, president, 1925. Business became the number one thing that gave you satisfaction in life. It used to be we look for satisfaction in our family, in our community, in our church, but not now. Coolidge went on to say, the man who builds a factory builds a temple. The man who works there worships there. We have a new ethos in our society today. We have a myth that's going around as well. And some of you may have heard this myth recently. Our economy needs to be strong. Has anyone heard that recently? In fact, it's always the case. The economy needs to be strong. Well, why? Why do we need a strong economy? Well, so that people can buy anything they want. Okay, well, that kind of sounds reasonable. But what's implicit in here, and not often articulated, is, well, why do we want people to want things? Well, people must want things and buy things, so our economy can be strong. There's a circular logic here that doesn't make sense when you're outside the myth, but it's always hard to see your own myth. When you're inside your own myth, you can't see it as mythic. It's when you have to step outside the circle. We need the economy to be strong so we can buy anything we want, and we need to want things so the economy can be strong. The challenge became is how do we make people want things they don't really need in order for the economy to be strong? We must shift America from a needs to a desires culture. People must be trained to desire things, to want new things, even before the old things have been entirely consumed. We must shape a new mentality. Man's desires must overshadow his needs. This was written by Paul Mazur, who worked for a company called Lehman Brothers. Paul Mazur was a partner of a guy that I want to talk about. This is Edward Bernays. Edward Bernays is often called the father of spin, or public relations. Now, Edward got his start on Broadway. He was a publicist for the Broadway stars, and he was very good at it. In fact, even today, about 100 years later, we still know some of his acts. We know of Ziegfeld Follies and Caruso, people that were not household names in their own countries, but because of Bernays, they got very famous. He did his job so well that when the US government decided to enter World War I, they hired him to join their propaganda department. What he did is he decided, since a lot of Americans did not want America to go into the war, he went over with the troops to Europe. And he would write up stories about the GIs and what a good job they're doing and how they saved their platoon and they helped this orphan and all these wonderful things that the GIs were doing. He wrote up and he sent to his publicist friends back in the US and he got them in the papers. And so all the American citizens were reading about this great job America was doing. So they got behind their boys over there. So the war became popular. And so his wheels started to turn. He thought, I wonder if I can do this in peacetime. I wonder if I can shape people's mentality that way. Well, during the war, when he went over to Europe, he got to meet an uncle of his that lived in Vienna. And this uncle complained that there were no good cigars in Europe now because of the war. So when Bernays came back to New York, he'd sent his uncle a box of Cuban cigars. In exchange, his uncle sent him a book that he'd just written. The book was called An Introduction to General Psychoanalysis. His uncle's name was Sigmund Freud. And Bernays loved his uncle's work because it talked about how people are irrational at the root and how you can change people's behavior at an unconscious level and get them to do things that they're not consciously noticing they're doing. And so he decided to take what he learned from the war and do this in peacetime, in a commercial way. But he knew he couldn't call it propaganda because that had kind of negative overtones. So he created something called the Center for Public Relations. Now, he's not the only one that did this, but he's kind of a very good example of how public relations started to shape our Western culture. And I want to share just one example, one story of how he did this. And this starts with the American Tobacco Company. The head of the American Tobacco Company came to Bernays one day and said, Bernays, we've got a problem. We only have half of our market in the US today. And Bernays says, what do you mean? Every man in America smokes. And the president said, yeah, every man in America smokes, but none of the women smoke. And Bernays says, you want women to smoke cigarettes? He says, sure, it's their right. They should be allowed to. They're Americans. So Bernays says, well, let me think about it. Do you mind if I hire some psychoanalysts to analyze women to find out why they don't smoke? And the president said, sure, go ahead. Spend whatever you need. So Bernays got some Freudian analysts to interview some women and discovered that women equated cigarettes with the penis. And they always saw that men were just playing with their phalluses. And they didn't want to have anything to do with that. So Bernays thought, the penis, of course, women subconsciously all want penises, right? My uncle proved that. So I just need somehow to link cigarette smoking to women's innate power. So he came up with a scam. Right in that time, the big women's power movement were the suffragettes. The suffragettes just succeeded in getting the vote in the US. This was the late 20s. And they fought a long, hard battle to get the freedom to be equal to men. And so Bernays thought, if somehow I can link cigarette smoking to the suffragette movement, then I may be able to get women to smoke. And Bernays knew that every Easter in New York City, they had a big parade. And so he created a stunt. He hired a bunch of debutantes, young 19, 20-year-old women, the top of society, and he hired them to go and disrupt the parade. And he said, I want you to hide cigarettes in your clothing. And in a signal from me, you're going to go into the parade and stop the parade. And I'm going to have a whole bunch of reporters and photographers on hand. And when they come to you, I want you to take out your cigarettes and light them up. And when the reporters ask you why you're smoking cigarettes, don't say they're cigarettes. Say instead, these are not cigarettes, these are freedom torches. And on the newspapers the next day, the headlines read, group of girls puff at cigarettes as gesture of freedom. All over America, there were women who were afraid to show their support for the suffragette movement because their husbands wouldn't like it or their fathers wouldn't like it. But they heard this, that the way to show that you're a supporter of the suffrage movement is to smoke. So they started taking up smoking in droves. Bernays went on to hire actresses to take up smoking in movies. It was the first product placement. He made it so that women smoked. Not because they need to smoke. Nobody needs to smoke. He made it so that they wanted to smoke. And yes, women, you've come a long way. It's different now. Now you're free to smoke. You're equal with men. But of course, Bernays did not raise women up to equality with men. He lowered them down. Now women are just as free as men to get cancer. Just ask Debbie Austin. She's a laryngectomy survivor. You can see she smokes now through the hole in her throat. In this poster, she says, I'll never forget the people who helped me get cigarettes when I was a kid. The power of advertising, according to Galbraith. Advertising by producers is increasingly needed to make affluent customers keep buying their products. The raw power of electronic mass media is capable, with enough money, of artificially creating a demand for products that consumers had no idea they wanted or needed. The role of advertising really has two sides. There's the dark side and the good side. So if you're talking to Yoda, advertising is here to inform you. You're here today because you were told about this. We advertise this, and that's good. The dark side, the Darth Vader side of advertising, is to conform you, to get you to behave in ways that you otherwise wouldn't behave. That's not in your best interest. They do this through subliminal psychological attacks. They get you to think that you need this when you don't. This is happening at an unconscious level, so how do you deal with this? Well, in yoga, there's a very ancient text written 1,800 years ago called the Yoga Sutra. And in this text, they offer a solution to this. The solution is called samtosha, which means contentment. Or if you want a more modern version of this, Rabbi Schwartz once said, true happiness is wanting what you already have. Or if you're more scientific, here's an equation you can use. Happiness is contentment divided by desire. If you're contented, the more contented you are, the happier you are. Or if your desire is less, that being the denominator, your happiness goes up. We have this myth that buying is going to make us happy. But that has to be a myth. Because think of it. I've been, through advertising and public relations, told that I really need this canteen this water bottle. And so I really crave this water bottle. If only I could have this water bottle, then I'll be happy. Life will be fulfilled. I'll have meaning in life. So I save up, I work hard, and after a few months, I finally get to buy this water bottle. And it's a great water bottle. It's all smooth. It's kind of shaped like a woman. It's sexy. And it's great. So I got my water bottle, and now I'm really happy. But after a couple of days, it's just a water bottle. I need the matching yoga mat. I need that silver-colored yoga mat. If I could have the matching yoga mat that goes with this water bottle, then I'll be happy. So I save up and get the yoga mat, and it looks really cool. I got this water bottle, and everyone's asking, where'd you get silver yoga mat? That goes really well with the bottle. But after a couple of days, but I need the matching top from Lululemon. It doesn't look right. Buying does not create happiness. Buying is like a short-term fix of any drug addict. You get a big buzz, but it's got to wear off. It has to wear off. Because if it didn't wear off, I'd never buy anything again. If buying this bottle made me happy, I'm not going to buy anything else. And then the economy will go down. I have to keep buying. So the illusion is that buying will create happiness. But it's just an illusion. It can't. Because if it did, you would stop buying. What creates happiness is contentment. Our friend the Buddha, 2,500 years ago, said that one of the 5 causes of suffering is desire, craving. Have you ever wanted something so bad it hurt? That can't be good. He's not saying that having things is bad. It's the desire, the craving for it that creates our suffering. And of course, that was 2,500 years ago. Maybe things are different now. So how about a more modern Buddha, Gandhi? Gandhi said, the earth provides enough to satisfy every man's needs, but not enough for every man's greed. And God forbid India should take to industrialism after the manner of the West. It would strip the world bare like locusts. Well, unfortunately, India has taken after industrialism, and the world is being stripped bare. Now, let's just give you a test here now. Where does your Shiraz come from? Do you buy your Shiraz from Australia? They do have very good Shiraz there. Or do you get it from California? Now, I once tried to study wines, and I got to the point where I could tell the difference between a red wine and a white wine. So I'm maybe not the best to tell the difference between a California Shiraz and an Australian Shiraz. To me, they taste the same. But the Australian Shiraz comes halfway around the world, and it's heavy. There's a lot of energy used to bring that Shiraz to your table. But how about from BC? We make Shirazes here in BC. And again, I can't vouch for the quality of them, but why are you paying for Shiraz to come all the way from California when we can have it right here? The question to ask yourself is, could I be content without this? Do I really need this one that comes all the way from Australia or California? Or could I be content with this one? Which do you need? Here's a test. Perrier, Aquafina, Pellegrino. Well, this is a trick question because you live in BC. If you can't drink our tap water, you need a new mayor. That's what you need. Let's look at it. Perrier, where does it come from? France. Pellegrino from Italy. You go to a restaurant, they ask you, would you like some water? Yes. Pellegrino from Italy? You're paying water to be shipped halfway around the world from Italy? Is Italian water better than ours? Or maybe you prefer Toronto tap water. So that's what's Aquafina. They just turn on the taps, fill it up, and here you go. Well, to be fair, in BC now, it's Vancouver tap water that you get in the bottle. The rest of Canada gets Toronto tap water. Why do we buy bottled water? This is a market based on anxiety. Some people are afraid of tap water for some reason. Tap water is more highly controlled and regulated by the government than bottled water. From a carbon footprint impact, 28 billion bottles a year are made in the US alone. These bottles do not get recycled. Most of them end up in landfills, and they bubble up to the top and get blown into the rivers, which come into the oceans. It takes 17 million barrels of oil to make those bottles. And it takes another 33 million barrels of oil to move those bottles around. That's 50 million barrels of oil a year just for bottled water. That's 2.5 days of US oil consumption just for bottled water. Where does your food come from? Do you buy it locally, or is your food coming from far away? Do you buy mangoes and bananas often, or do you buy local peaches and apples? Mangoes and bananas have to come from far, far away. Apples are from the Okanagan. But you got to be careful. I used to buy pears a lot because I thought, well, they're locally grown. Turns out that only 7% of the pears we have in Canada come from Canada. Fortunately, Whole Foods now they show where you get your food from. And they show that all the pears that they were selling were from Argentina. I switched to local apples. Your fruit, do you buy acai, which is a new superfood from Brazil? or local blueberries and raspberries, which have almost the same antioxidant content. Again, I'm not saying never have a mango lassi. What you do once in a while is not the problem. It's what you do all the time that creates the problem. So really what you want to do is become a locavore. Wherever possible, buy locally. So if you agree with this, here's the resolution we can take. Aware of the damage and suffering caused by unmindful consumption, I resolve to be aware of how what I purchase or consume affects people, animals, plants, and my planet. Ask yourself, do I need this or do I simply want it? Could I be content without it? Think globally by buying locally. You've heard this many times. Check where things are produced or packaged. Check what the product is made of. See if there are less energy-intensive, safer alternatives. And avoid packages and products that are not recyclable. And more feasible, buy in bulk. It's much better to buy a bigger size. It'll last you longer, and if it's more than you need, share it with your neighbors. The worst place to buy is right at the checkout stand, because that's where they got the smallest packages, which per weight is more packaging than product. Where possible, buy organic, despite the cost. You're going to save so much money by not using your car because you're walking now and riding your bike that you can afford organic. If it's not available, ask.